Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Camp Owners Podcast. Howie and Kelly back with you for another episode. We are going to do something a little different, something we've done in previous seasons. We're doing a crossover episode with our friends over at the Day Camp Pod. Thanks to Andy Pritikin and Sam Thompson for recording recently an amazing conversation with Jonathan Gold called The Journey of Camp Ownership, which Kelly and I feel is a continuation of all these great conversations we've been having over the last couple seasons. And Jonathan Gold has been a guest on the Camp Owners podcast, really knowledgeable, very experienced camp operator. And we thought, Kelly and myself thought that this would be a great episode for everyone in the camp industry. So while it was featured in the day camp space, I think a lot of takeaways that Kelly and I have been discussing are applicable to whatever your journey is in the camp industry. So, Kelly, I know that we both listened to it. Nice to see you. What are some initial thoughts that our listeners can look forward to in listening to this conversation? I might also add that Justin Pritikin is also added into this conversation with some really great insights as a young camp pro about all the things I think are in the minds of potentially future camp operators and owners. So, Kelly, some thoughts? Nice to see you again.
Yes, you too. And yes, thank you, first of all, for Andy and Sam doing all the hard work for us. Thank you so much. But this was it was perfect for our platform, perfect for camp owners and directors or future potential in that arena. But I had a lot of really great takeaways. I think one of the biggest ones that stuck with me, at least initially, was I love the quote about like the burning your ships and being prepared
Mhm.
to lose. I think that that was such a good metaphor for that idea of when you take this leap into camp ownership, that you need to be prepared to burn your ships, or you're just all in. You're completely all in. Like we're just going for it and we might lose, but we're just going for it. So I really just like that old metaphor for camp ownership. I thought that was good. What did you like from it, Howie?
Well, I think that d as entrepreneurs, which camp owners are, you can prepare yourself on all kinds of business concepts and things like that. But I just think there's so much mentoring and learning on the job and being part of environments that teach you aspects of understanding the business. And there was a really nice moment that I think that our listeners will enjoy about Jonathan's view about the transparency that owners can offer longtime employees about, peeling back the curtain about what they look at and how they analyze things. And I just think for anyone who's looking to get into camp ownership, being part of an organization that has that transparency, when the time is right to bring you in is so valuable. I know that, those have been elements that I've come to appreciate through my journey as a camp owner. And I think that was something that was really good as well. And I also just generally think that and I think Justin addressed this too, about just getting a collection of experiences and then just jumping in, really wholeheartedly. I think there's some resistance, of course. I think the burden of coming up with the money to buy camps is a very real thing, and it can be very daunting. And I just think that the conversation in that part of the podcast was really good. I think Jonathan addresses it really well, and Andy has so much experience too. So just some random thoughts that I think the audience will enjoy.
I really liked as well the conversation of Justin bringing up, he was like, camp people aren't great at business, or that obviously isn't always your first strength, right? A lot of
Mhm.
times it's people and like they described as storytellers. But I really loved Jonathan's view of like, well, they're not necessarily not bad at it. They just don't know. That's not what their background is. And he was saying too, like, it's not rocket science. And I liked when Andy asked him about, well, would you hire the good storyteller and then a fractional CFO? And Jonathan goes like, no, I wouldn't. I would teach that good storyteller to be good with finances or business, or at least understand them.
Yeah.
I love that. I am not a business person at heart. I'm a people person who has learned the business thing. And so I hear Justin's also fear on that being scary or not transparent, but it's also learnable. And
Yeah.
there are people and mentors that are good at it. And I think you want to be a part of an organization or know camp people who are willing to help you get there and teach you, like Jonathan Gold, like other organizations. So I just really like that. He's like, no, I wouldn't. I would hire a good person who I can teach to do that. So I
Yeah.
like that takeaway.
So those are just a few things that got us excited about sharing this podcast with this audience. I hope you really enjoy it. Kelly and I will be back next time with some really interesting guests that will continue this conversation around camp ownership and just continue good conversations that I hope you find really interesting related to the camp owner industry. And so we look forward to that. We always want to thank Kelly and I. We want to thank Camptivities and Camp Brain for being our sponsors and continue to do the great work that they do. We really hope you enjoy this episode and the buildup that we've provided. I think you're really going to enjoy it. And we look forward to having you join us once again on the Camp Owners Podcast. Thanks, everybody.
This is the Camp Owners Podcast from Go Camp Pro, exploring best practices and issues that professionals in the private camp industry face every day. You can find our show notes at gocamp.pro/ownerspod.
Celebrating 30 years, CampBrain Camp Management Software not only provides a great tool and caring support for your best ever workdays, but a delightful registration experience for parents. Discover what more than 1,800 camps know and how you can love your software too. Visit campbrain.com/ownerspod.
Activity schedules are the backbone of every camper's experience. If there's a staffing change, it's really hard to find a person that knows your camp and the nuance your schedule takes. Come check out Camptivities to learn more about our scheduling tools designed for camps by camp people. Find out more at camptivities.com.
Welcome back, my friends, to the Take Camp Podcast. I'm Andy Pritikin, Director of Liberty Lake in the Philly suburbs of New Jersey.
I'm Sam Thompson from Crystal Lake Park District in Crystal Lake, Illinois.
And Justin Pritikin is hiding in the background. He's going to be joining us later. But today we have the one and only, my good friend, Jonathan Gold, back. I think this might be Jonathan's third or fourth day camp podcast, Jonathan. You might have to get the varsity jacket at some point. Jonathan, talking to us from his mobile office in Florida. What part of Florida?
Boynton Beach.
Boynton Beach. Excellent. And Jonathan, this past weekend, participated in the Scope pickleball tournament with 100 pretty much northeast camp people in Florida.
There were some Florida people there.
Yeah?
Yeah.
But there's northeast people, I'm saying northeast people who have moved in the off season to Florida.
And there were a lot of Florida campers that go to camp in the Northeast, like kids from down here. There were a lot of Florida campers, yeah.
But besides you and Josh Mail, can you think of any other day camp people that are in Florida in their off season working remotely? Because that's not the norm so much. It's a resident camp thing.
It's a resident camp thing, yeah.
Yeah. But shout out to Josh Mail. He took the initiative during pandemic. We should get him on here. But anyway, moving forward. Okay, Jonathan, we brought you on and we were going to do a little State of the Union about the economy and all that, and we'll do that. But I was talking to Justin about you, and he said people love the podcast we've been doing, especially with Greg Licht and Sam Borick, where we talk about sort of like the hero's journey to get to running your own camp. And seeing the young people now in their 20s and 30s, and many of them who have aspirations to one day being at least the director of a camp, maybe not, they don't want their mortgage involved with being an owner. But Justin thought it would be a really good idea, and I agree, to talk about your journey because it is a good one. And even though it took place, a lot of it in the 90s, I think it is relevant still. I still think that elbow grease and making your own opportunities and betting on yourself are universal and will always be. So can we start back to you in business school, listening to Dan Kagan give his dissertation?
I actually was sitting next to Danny Kagan. That's a great story. So we both went to Florida Business School in the 80s, late 80s. And I was sitting next to him in a finance class, and we had to come up with a sample income statement And I was looking over his shoulder at his and going, and I was like, dude, what is that? Except you didn't say dude back then. I was like, more man, what is that? And he said, oh, it's this day camp I work for. I was like, that's a day camp? Of course, it was Jeff Lake's. The numbers were pretty substantial even back then. It's in fact very substantial if I remember them correctly. And I can't trust my memory. And that was one of the first sort of inklings I got, because it wasn't even on the radar then for me. It wasn't
Right. So at this point, because we have gone over your sort of like camp experience, like when you were younger, like at this point, you had gone to camp, you had been to camp, you had done your volunteer time at the Ronald McDonald Camp in California, right?
Good memory.
Right. But at this point, you were going to business school to be a business person or even be a business professor. That's what you were thinking, right?
No, I had never intended to get into education. That was definitely a side road that I was I never intended to go into business education, and I never intended to get my PhD. Those were all like little detours I had to take to get to full-time camping.
Right.
So that was just how it.
So at some point soon after this, you got connected with Ben Applebaum, though, right?
So yeah, my mom was friends with Nancy Goldberg, and I talked to her. She was like a family friend. I talked to her, and she then introduced me to Ben Applebaum. And I think I was at the Tri-State Conference in Teaneck in '88, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the one right before the parking lot flooded and where all the exhibitors were. I don't know if you remember that one, or you were there.
Oh yeah, yeah, that was one of my first. Yeah.
So it was that one, I think. And the first session I ever went to at Tri-State, and I'm surprised I just pulled this memory up, was Jay Jacobs talking about getting Hulk Hogan to break color war. But it was really more about what to do when your enrollment starts to trail off and how to build excitement and everything else. And I just remember that. I just remember that one thing.
All right, so take us along. So then what happened?
I proceeded to try to get a full-time job in camping, to no avail, because there weren't a lot of full-time jobs around back then. It was mostly owners, like an office manager, and a lot of it that there weren't even offices really. Most people were doing it out of their house, right?
Yeah, sort of your Meadowbrook model.
Yeah,
The owner and the office manager.
Yeah, it was just nothing. There was nothing really out there, and
They didn't have number 3s and 4s and things like this, right?
No, it was a summer thing, and the full-time year-round employees really didn't exist that much. So I worked for the Blacks one summer out of Pine Forest, and then got a job with a not-for-profit in Westchester. And that was like, I think in retrospect, that was probably the best thing ever, because you needed to learn how to operate where there was no money. You needed to learn how to provide a camp where there was like not a lot of money. And the people that were managing you were not particularly sophisticated either. So they would say, okay, here's your budget, stick with this. And you'd have to work. But
Now you're speaking my language. No money. Here's your budget. Do what you gotta do.
Here's your budget. Go do this. And I'm like, okay. The first year I wound up working at a very small camp in Croton Falls, New York, where we didn't have a pool. When the kids went into the lake, they came out sort of covered with this slime, this algae slime. And this is actually a funny story. The first time I ever did an open house, I got lost getting to the camp because it was so remote and I didn't have Google Maps or anything like that. And the directions were really obscure. And my assistant director, who was there, who I hadn't met yet, was entertaining a bunch of parents that were sort of angrily waiting for the camp director to come and give them a tour of camp. This was like in January. There was ice on the roads and stuff. And of course, hadn't seen the camp yet. My intention was to get there half an hour early so he could show me the camp and then I could do the tour. And we're actually very good friends to this day. So we were standing there with his arms crossed, seeing how I reacted. I was like, okay, everybody, let's go. We're going to take a walk around camp. And I just made everything up. I just made every single thing up about camp.
Yeah.
And he was in the back of the group helping out, but not really. He just wanted to see what this guy was going to do. And I could see he was cracking up. I mean, he was cracking up. Afterwards, we had a beer. We're good friends to this day. But I had no idea what I was doing or what I was talking about. But I figured it didn't matter because they were all new parents and they didn't know anyway.
Yeah, this was Liberty Lake's first couple of tours in 2002. No doubt about it. I had pictures, well, to make it even worse, Jonathan, with mine, I had pictures of kids playing at my friends' camps. And I was like, it's going to be like this. I swear. Because there was no history. We were literally starting at camp.
There are those times where you're at a camp and you're selling dirt.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're selling dirt. Here's where the new pool is going to be.
So was it prior to this or after this, though, Jonathan, where you had the situation where you were going to run the sports camp or whatever at the college?
Oh, that
Because
was
that's a
prior to
great
that.
little
Yeah,
story.
Ben and Skip had this idea to do, Skip Fitness had this idea to do sport camps at William Patterson. I think the year after, wow, I'd forgotten about that one. Thanks, Andy. The year after my son was just born, so it was 1990. And it was that summer we did a series of 1-week sport camps, skate parks, swim, tennis at William Patterson, but it really wasn't very successful. It was just
Out of a college, right? But let's just pause though on that. Okay, so here you were. Jonathan wants to get into the camp industry. He finds this big muckety muck guy with this reputation. All right, who says, "Okay, Jonathan, we're going to bet on you a little bit. We're going to run this program." And you told me you met with the dean and like you came up with an arrangement and all this kind of stuff. And you just had a freaking baby. Okay,
Yeah.
because a lot of opportunity. I just had a kid. We got to stay close to this. I don't want to move. Right? There's all these excuses. Always you hear about people not taking the next leap. Right?
yeah.
And yet you did it. Right? And it didn't work out.
It didn't work out. Nope.
It didn't work out.
Yeah,
You
we never
actually.
got the kids. To be fair though, the initial was to run a regular day camp on the William Patterson campus. And we were getting really far into that until May. And then the board of directors of William Patterson stepped in and said, no, we don't want to do that, but you could do these sports specialty camps. So we did have to change tack immediately, like with no time left to the summer. So we had to do that. So it was
All right. So that now you're at the nonprofit camp.
wasn't
in,
the cards.
Upper Westchester.
Yeah, in the not-for-profit camp. I don't know. They had 150 odd kids, maybe 100 kids. We wound up getting out of the Slime Lake site and going to a site in Croton-on-Hudson, which was much better demographically. And the first like real program I ran was this camp called Camp Discovery. Did that for 5 years. It was at zero. And we very quickly got to, we had to get through all the zoning, all the planning board stuff within a year, which we did. And by the way, that as horrible as that experience was, it's great experience. And then we got open and we almost immediately, I think within 2 years, we got to capacity as the Y camp. Wound up building a big pool and renovating the site and doing all sorts of stuff. And then Jake Packard.
I love this part. I love this part of the story. Well, let's pause your story. So now there's this camp in New Jersey, okay, that's being run by a teacher. Okay, so it's part-time. The guy's working on it part-time. They got 150 kids, right? At this big place that they had bought a pool club and they want turning it into a day camp. And we always joke around, Jonathan and I, who knows actually how many kids are at a camp, right? It's the caterer, it's the camp photographer, it's the video guy, right? So the family that owned that camp, they were looking for a full-time director. And they're asking their sort of VIPs in the industry, which was their videographer. And this guy said, "Oh, I know this great young guy."
Well, his kids came to my camp, Andy.
Well, that's how we knew him.
Yeah, so he would be there for visiting days. He saw the camp, so he knew me because his daughter went there. And then he made the introduction. And I also had a full-time job teaching at the time. That in between there, somewhere in there, like 1989, I became a college professor at Caldwell University because I had my MBA. And because I intentionally tried to pick a job that would give me the most amount of time in the summers off, because every other camp job I had were all summer jobs. Never had a full-time job in camping up to that point. I'm teaching, and then I wound up at Meadowbrook in Long Valley with the Lizers, who were super great people. And they also sort of weren't ready quite to take the full-time jump yet. And because the camp couldn't support a full-time director yet. And so we sort of shook hands, Rod and I, and he said, when you get big enough, we're gonna hire you full-time. And that's basically what happened.
Celebrating 30 years, CampBrain camp management software not only provides a great tool in caring support for your best ever work days, but a delightful registration experience for parents. They take pride in building long-lasting relationships through their incredible support and care they show to each client. And don't take our word for it. Cassandra Parker, Director of Campers and Families at KE Camp, shares, "We love customer service at CampBrain because everyone's always happy and helpful. There's never a time that we are waiting for answers. CampBrain is not only focused on your current needs, but for the next 30 summers and beyond. They're continually refining their solution to deliver exactly what camp owners need now and will next, from SMS texting to integrated payment solutions and more. Discover what more than 1,800 camps know and how you can love your software too. Visit campbrain.com/ownerspod.
Every year, it's the same thing. Lots of hours spent working on the daily schedules, only for there to be mistakes, missed activities, and lots of stress. Why is it so difficult? There's got to be a better way. And there is Camptivities, an activity scheduler made specifically for camps. Group scheduling or camper scheduling, we've got you covered. Different day schedules, no problem. Auto scheduling, elective scheduling, batch scheduling, schedule the way that works for your camp. With over 60 reports, you'll be able to see the data easily. Don't wait until the new year. Now's the time to find a better way to schedule and save 15% for the first year. Make activity scheduling easier, less stressful, and more efficient. We'd love to show you the next big thing in camp, so don't wait. Start the onboarding process now when you have the time. Let us help you get away from your desk and back out in camp. Visit camptivities.com to set up a time to chat.
So wait, just going back a second to the camp, it was a Jewish camp too, wasn't it? In
Yeah.
West, right.
Yeah.
You didn't live anywhere near there either.
Oh, no, it was like
Let's bring that up.
80 miles one way.
Yeah. So that's just another, I just want to throw that in there, that this was not a right around the corner thing, right? Jonathan
That's
had
a
a
luxury. If you have it, it's a luxury. It's
Jonathan had a little boy who has now given him a little boy as a grandpa. So yeah, so this was a hardship. This was like a real pain. It's not like there was more traffic now than there is then. Like it still sucked. Was the Tappan Zee Bridge even built yet? I don't even know.
Yeah, okay. I'm not that old, all right? Yes, it was, but it was still the Tappan Zee Bridge.
Right. I forgot what it's called now. All right, so then you take over this. There you go. So you take over this camp, okay, and you take it from 150 to.
It was close. I think they had 200 or 300 kids, and within 2 years, the first summer, we were up over 1,000 children, and we had to expand the pool and go through another series of planning board meetings to get the site plan adjusted and everything else. And at that point, I was just around at the time where I was going to take sabbatical from my college job, which I did. And so my feeling was, and by the way, without asking for any more money, like I didn't say, all right, now I'm working 5 days a week, where before I was working 2.5, 3 days a week. If I were asking for any more money, I just said, I'm going to put all my effort into camp, see what happens. And then it worked out.
Yeah.
And then after I got tenure, I resigned from being a college professor.
No,
They made me get my PhD. They made me. I never wanted to.
And that's when I left education, was when I was if I had taught one more day, I would have gotten tenure. So here's a typical situation now. Well, not a typical situation, but something that could happen. So here's Jonathan, who took this camp from 200 kids to 1,000 kids, who's kicking ass and taking names, and all this money is getting siphoned off to this lovely couple, okay, of former school teachers, and their silent investor, like jewelers or something, right?
Yeah,
and we've known each other for a while. So this went on for how many years?
I was there for 5 years, 5 summers.
5 summers?
Yeah.
Okay. Really? I thought he was even more.
97 to 2002.
Okay. So this is when I met Jonathan, was during this time. And I was working for people, right? And working my butt off for them too. And you could throw Mark Newfield and a whole bunch of other people who we met at this point, and that we were like, okay, we want to be, not just the directors, but we want to be the owners as well of a thing. And we sort of went on a little mission to find places to reach out to people, to find the owner operators who were like pushing 70, whose kids didn't want to be involved and such, and reaching out to them. And by the way, this is sort of before email, sort of before websites, right? At this time. So it just made it harder. Like you literally had to put your neck out there.
Yeah.
Right. So how did you find out about Crest?
That was you.
That's interesting.
You never knew this. We were having a drink after seeing a demographer at one of the New Jersey meetings.
Oh yeah, the guy from Rutgers. He was hilarious.
And then you, in a very offhanded way, said, "Oh yeah, this camp is like they've had 6 directors in 5 years, or 5 directors in 6 years." I don't remember what it was. And I just took a mental note and went ding. I was like, "All right." I went home, did some research, found out.
Oh, and is owned by.
It's owned by a corporation. It's owned by a corporation that specialized in special needs kids. So they basically ran a special needs school during the year, and then ran a summer program in the summer. at the site that is now Oak Crest Day Camp. And I just
Oh,
went
another
in-
thing. Wait, and
ahead.
hadn't they, this company that owned them because there had been a tragedy at the place,
Yeah, so
like
a little
a
boy
decade
had
or so
died,
before, right?
And they're not sure it happened at camp because
Mhm.
they weren't sure, but he like swallowed a thumbtack or something. And
Right.
I don't really know that whole story.
But that's how the whoever the people were that owned
the kids
that.
won. Yeah, the kids won.
Yes,
company.
they sold to
got-
this Kids One company.
Right. And yeah, before that it was a family, and before that it was a farm. And it's
Right.
the first year, as far as I could tell, that it was operated as some sort of childcare camp / preschool was 1961. So it had been around for a while.
Right. All right. So then you walk in there, and
I
now
literally
how do
found out
how
where
do
their
you?
corporate office was.
Yes. So tell everybody how you sort of made this happen, because this is great.
No letter, no email, no phone call, because I think I might have tried to get a hold of them a couple of times to no avail. So I found out where their office was, knocked on the door, walked in, and I said, I need to speak to Ellen. And they're like, who are you? And I said, I want to buy the camp. And
Were you
I didn't know
telling
that-
this? Were you telling, what's her face? I can't remember her name. Who worked with you for the next 15 years? Who had been like the quote unquote camp director there?
Yeah. So no, I was basically, she wasn't there. No, this was their corporate office.
Oh,
So
okay.
I was telling like whoever with the receptionist was, I don't remember who it was. And I go, is she here? And they're like, yeah, well, she's here, but I don't know if she can speak to you or not because she's busy, blah, blah. I said, why don't you go ask? Because I really want to buy the camp. And she let me into her office and she basically said, who are you? And I go, well, I want to buy your camp. You've had 5 directors in 6 years and you're clearly not thriving. What do you want for it? And I had no business at all because I didn't have any kind of financial means. Nobody lent me a lot of money.
Fake
You
it
know.
till you make it. Fake it till you
Yeah.
make it.
And so she threw out a number that literally might as well have been, the size of the federal deficit from where I was sitting. Like I just, it was an unattainable number to me. But again, I just played it cool and I was like, all right, let's see. Why don't we start a negotiating process, which we did. My favorite meeting was this clandestine meeting we had at the Stage Deli at Tri-State at 7 a.m, where this woman proceeded to order 2 hot dogs with sauerkraut and mustard. And I was like, what are you doing?
She's trying to throw you off. She's trying to make you off kilter.
Yeah. And we ultimately negotiated a deal. And to be fair, I thought about this before the podcast. I never really thought that I'd be able to pull it off myself. I always figured at some point I would have to go to one of the people in the industry that had money and look for a partner. I never thought I'd be able to really pull it off myself. And I just, and there's a saying that I would tell to all the young people out there that are thinking about this. Reality begins just beyond what you think is possible. And I had this in my head. I don't remember where I heard it or where I came up with it, but I just kept saying, I'm just going to take the next step, take the next step, take the next step and see where it goes. And that's what happened. And took every single dime that I had, literally, and every cent of equity in any hard asset that I had. And
yeah, and your story, your life, I always joke around with Jonathan saying his life is just 5 years ahead of my life in some ways. But something that we had in common is that both of our wives actually had good jobs.
Yeah, well,
so in a way, we were taking advantage of them because
that's
we were.
Story, except mine got laid off 5 months before closing, and she didn't get another job.
Oh,
so that was even more pressure. That was like more pressure to really get it done. So it was interesting, and I gotta say, this is why I still bank with the Dime Bank. Those guys were just like so phenomenal at the time.
Yeah,
they were the bankers, of course, for Meadowbrook, so they had seen what I had done, and they really took a chance. They took a chance.
Yeah, but I like when you tell me how when you walked away from closing.
Oh yeah,
you had how much money in your bank account at that point?
So when you go, for those of you that don't know, when you go to a big real estate closing, there are a lot of attorneys hanging around. There's the title people. Everybody is really smiling because they're all going to make a ton of money on the deal.
It's like when you're buying a house, except like times 50.
Times about 50. And then you're going to sign documents that basically say, regardless of what happens, even if you die, the bank is going to collect money from your dead carcass. Okay. Like that's basically what you're saying. Like, regardless of what happens, you can't, there are no ifs, ands, or buts. And here's another document that says, if anything happens, we're going to get paid. And so everybody's smiling. When I'm looking around this table, everybody's smiling. And I'm just going to myself, okay, and we walked out, that's my ex-wife and I, we walk out of there and I go, we should go out to dinner because we have $179 in our checking account. And that's it. That's it. Everything else is now pledged to the bank.
Our checking account, not just his checking account, the family checking account. Yeah.
That's
yeah.
it.
That is, to me, is the definition of betting on yourself.
Yeah, that was it. That was all we had, because at that point, the bank owned everything I had. And there was a lien, a secondary lien on all of that with the former owner. So really, we had nothing. In reality, we had nothing.
How many years now go or months go by before you get the call from Marty
From who now?
from Pine Grove?
Oh, that's 5 years later. Actually, again, that was not a call. That was a solicitation from us.
I know both of us had solicited him,
Yeah.
but he sort of called you out of the blue.
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't remember how that went down, because it's just foggy in my memory, but I do remember it was right after the crash of 2008. So
Mhm.
so now 5 years had gone by, and we started the process just as the economy was tanking.
Right. So just to bring people up to speed on this. So as I said, when Jonathan and I were in the late 90s and early 2000, we were contacting people that we thought maybe they would want to work a deal with us, because we had so many friends like Jay Jacobs and Scott Brody who had gotten these situations where they had found this older owner and they sort of took pity on the young person, and they worked out a deal where they were holding paper, they were holding the mortgage, and worked out an overtime situation with them, because that was really our only way, because we had no money, right? And it turns out, I'm guessing, all right, but I think it's a smart guess, that you were probably the last person to solicit him. And therefore, when he woke up one day and said, you know what, that's enough, I'm 72, I'm selling my place, whatever, he called you.
Right. And I honestly, the camp had, I think, like 100 kids enrolled the summer before.
Oh my gosh.
Something less than that. And he wanted an astronomical amount of money, and it was impossible to get a loan for what he wanted. And so I just said to him, listen, we'll do a lease purchase, and I'll pay you so much in a lease for 3 years. Give me 3 years to get the camp up to a level where it can support your sale price. And we both win. And that's what happened.
So you were
But
kind
if
of,
I hadn't, then he could have just taken the camp back and sold it to somebody else.
so part of it's right place, right time, or being persistent.
Well, and taking opportunities as they come, because Jonathan called me right after this guy had called him. And he's just like, can you believe this guy calls me? This is the last thing I need right now. I'm just trying to get my plates up and going. This recession is hitting and all this kind of stuff. But how could I say no to this opportunity?
Ben Applebaum once said something to me, and I do think we should probably move on after this, Andy, because I don't think the story's that fascinating. But Ben Applebaum once said something to me that always rang true in my head at those moments, which is, he said to me, Jonathan, you can be as successful as your stomach. And whatever you can handle in terms of stress and digestion and health, you can be that successful. But a lot of people, it was good advice. It was really good advice.
Yeah.
Very sound
All right.
advice.
But we're not moving on so quickly, because we do have to talk to number 3, because Jonathan oversees 3 day camps. And so we don't have to get into the weeds of this, but there are all different situations out there. Okay.
Yeah.
And there are many situations like Everwood, right, which in Massachusetts that I'm involved in, where the township owns a piece of property and are willing to lease it to people to run a camp on it, right? And I'm not saying run their rec program on it like Eddie Norgard, who we had on the last episode, okay? I'm saying like run a private camp on it. They'll let you do that. And you stumbled on a situation that's actually in the town that you were living in, and the camp that had been there for years hadn't even run for a year or two, right? And they put it out to
0.
yeah. So they so when a camp doesn't run for a year or two, okay. And by the way, shout out to the many people who have done this, right? Because I just visited a sleepaway camp, Pocono Ridge out there or whatever, with Danny and Scott and Newfield and Stein and Gordon, who had Pocono Springs, excuse me, who basically took over a camp that had been sitting dormant for almost 10 years, right? But what starts happening is, trees start growing in the pool and things like that, right? And basically they put it out to bid, because that's what municipalities have to do. And Jonathan showed up, and in everybody's mind who was there, overbid.
Yeah.
Because he sort of saw the long-term, vision on it. And next thing you know,
Which was another lesson I got from Ben Applebaum, by the way.
yeah, which was what? Spell it out.
Which was, because for a while I worked for Ben as sort of his research assistant looking for camps. And I asked him one day, I was like, aren't you overpaying for this? He goes, only today.
Right.
What do you mean? Well, in 2 or 3 years, we're going to be underpaid. It'll look like we underpaid for it. He was so right. He was so right.
Yeah. Well, any sports fan can tell you that, right? When you see the contracts, you're like, you can't pay this guy that much. And then 3 years later, it's, oh, wow, we got a great deal. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's pretty much the story. But I think, again, I feel like the history part is not going to be as relevant as the next part of the podcast. So.
Yeah, no, it's true. But I just got to ask you a couple of questions before we skip out into that. So now you're the
over the record to Justin that I am trying to get your dad to move on. It's not working. So go ahead.
These are Justin's questions now. Okay. I'm just going to ask a couple, but so you're overseeing 3 camps. Okay. Now you have operators who are really running relatively independently at 2 of them, right?
Yes.
But what personal values do you feel that you, Jonathan Gold, are bringing to those camps' cultures? And how in the world can you ensure that they're actually being upheld?
Well, that's actually a really easy answer to this question. It's a very simple question to answer. You have to make sure the people that are running them are philosophically aligned with what you believe the role of camping is in kids and children's lives. And when they are, they're going to do things a little bit different than you, but they're going to arrive at the same train station ultimately. It might be a slightly different track, and you got to be okay with that. That's easy. That's an easy question. You just have to make sure that those, and it's not, by the way, it's not an easy thing to do. It's an easy question. I want to be clear on that. Oftentimes it's a very difficult thing to do. So
An easy answer, right?
yeah, it's an easy answer. It's not necessarily so easy to do, which I think is a good segue to some of the things we're going to talk about in the second half of the hour is how do you develop those people and how do you get them to be true camp operators? So that is a good question.
Right. All right. Well, I appreciate you taking us along your crazy journey, Jonathan. And look, he's sitting here in Florida now, right? Enjoying the
Correct.
weather that is the
Correct.
exact same as New Jersey right now. All right. And we're back. We've got a couple of really great podcasts with Justin and Jack Schott and Sam Bork and Greg Licht, where we were talking about sort of the inroads and on-roads and the difficulties and the perceived bumps in the roads and such for getting into the camp industry and becoming a camp director and moving up the ladder and such. And anyway, so we have Jonathan here, and Jonathan has hired a whole bunch of people over the years at these 3 camps as well, which, like he said, seems easy, but sure ain't. And so Justin, I want to, well, actually, Jonathan, I think you asked a really important question right before we got on to Justin that I shut you guys both up and said, wait, save that for the podcast. So why don't you?
Just about to get into a good conversation.
Yeah. So could you recall that question?
Sure. So I'm curious, Justin, as to what you think it is that people in your age cohort, I'm gonna label that, say 25 to 35, whether they're middle management, assistant directors, or even full directors. Where do you think? What is it that they're interested in talking about? What do they want to know about the business side of running a camp? What are the holes? What are the gaps of knowledge?
So I think that, I did not decide to become a full-time camp professional because I'm excited to learn about QuickBooks, right? Now I've watched my mom do all these behind the scenes stuff all of my life so that I have even the faintest idea of what operationally happens behind the scenes of camp. And I think there's just an awareness problem at face value. I think when I talk to a lot of younger camp professionals, they don't know what their camp's operating budget is. They don't know how much busing costs at their camp, what insurance costs. They just know that they are given a $20,000 programming and evening activities budget and told to run with it. And then they do like that version of counselor math and come up with whatever they think is the narrative of how much money camp actually has.
Right.
Which, by the way, it's similar. I mean, Sam can echo this. It's similar in what she does, right? Her park district has a huge budget, right? But they're parsed off just a little bit to you guys, right? And then you hire people and you're just telling them, do it the cheapest way possible, right?
Yeah. Until you've been a director a while, you have no idea about the big picture and what actually goes on behind the scenes, at least in government camping. You don't have the big picture.
No, I think it's anywhere. And I'll let you continue, Justin. But what I was telling Justin is you have to demand it. You have to ask for it too. Because I think a lot of times it's not that they're hiding it. It's just that nobody really cares.
People don't even know what the right question is.
I think that's the first part. And I also think that there are a lot of camp owners who are doing very financially well for themselves that don't want to show that. Like you said, show me the books. So I think that you're not going to get the answer you want. And then sidetrack to that. I think there's a lot of camp operators who are not doing great when it comes to recruiting kids right now. And their books don't look that great. And they don't want to show that either.
Well, I want to address that point, Justin. Okay. Because early on in the journey part that Andy was talking about, I was trying to run, I was at this new camp. I'm trying to do my thing. I'm trying to grow it. I had grown another camp from zero. And my owners were fairly tight about the finances of the camp. And I literally called them out. And this is something that I strongly recommend if you're in this position. I called them and I said, listen, guys, I'd really like to take you to lunch Thursday. And they're like, what? Is something wrong? I'm like, no, there's nothing wrong. There's some things I want to talk to you about. I want to take you to lunch. We met in Morristown, New Jersey. We sat down and had lunch. And I was like, listen, I cannot make your camp successful without being able to read the instruments, the financial instruments it takes to fly this plane. I can't do it. If I'm blind, I'm never going to get to where you want me to go. All right. So you hired me to do a job. I need the tools to do the job. You got to give. And basically, Ron Leiser, who was there at the time, just shook his, nodded his head at me. He said, you're right. I mean, I don't know how we're not there. You're there. There were remote owners, and he agreed. And sort of then you can now begin to steer and navigate your craft. And you can't do it without those things. It's just not possible. You couldn't fly a plane without knowing your altitude and where the mountains are, right? And I think inherent is a basic knowledge of what to ask for. And I think that's what I'm asking you.
Yeah, I don't think people know. And it's a bit of a, I don't want to sound like lazy and wording it as general as this, but I don't think people are taking camp jobs with the idea of, I'm going to leave here in 2 years and get a better job somewhere else. Right. And I think people are taking camp jobs, either getting pissed off and underpaid and then spinning off into something educational, fun, less mentally taxing, or they get paid really well working for a multi-camp organization, nothing against multi-camp organizations, and never leave because there's not a better alternative.
Yeah.
So that's okay, by the way. I think that we as an industry need to do a better job at educating people what's out there. And I'll give you what I actually think is out there, but also what you need to know to then succeed when you pick one of these pathways.
So let's talk to one of those points right away. Okay, so for all aspiring camp entrepreneurs out there, and I've said this to so many people, it's that famous line from The Hunt for Red October, when Sean Connery was talking to his first officer. He said, when Cortez arrived at the New World, he burned his ships so that his men would be properly motivated, knowing there was no way home. When you cross over into an ownership position, you're burning your ships. You're basically saying, I am going to make this work or probably go bankrupt, right? I think those are, Andy, would you agree that those are your two options at that point? You're either going to succeed or fail miserably, and you got to be okay with that. And it doesn't mean you're going to be a failure. It just means that whatever happened didn't work out for you.
Yeah, no, that's a Jay Jacobsism that I sit with all the time, which is when you get into something, when you get involved in something, you have to be prepared to lose.
Yep.
That's it.
I think my difference on this is I think camp ownership is one thing. And I do think that there is a rational fear for younger people who are economically more insecure than folks were back in the day, college debt, all that stuff. If I had a ton of student debt, I wouldn't have taken my first camp job for less than retail full time, ultimately, right? So I think there's that commitment, being scared of that commitment with the liability attached to it. There's a responsibility and effort that comes with having to own a camp, right? At the end of the day, it's on you. But I think that there are easier tracks now to owning a camp. You can be the director at a independent operated camp that doesn't own it. You can be the independent director who owns a camp. You could go up the not-for-profit track, or you can be a director at a multi-camp business entity and have a nice life.
Oh, you could definitely have a nice life.
There's nothing wong with that. I think there's now multiple paths.
Well, yeah, the fact that we're saying there's nothing wrong with that indicates to me that somewhere in what you're saying, well, this is here and this is here. You're not what I'm speaking to is, and one of the things that concerns me, and certainly I've had a lot of talks with one of my directors about this, is sort of the lack of entrepreneurial drive that we see, because a lot of people in that position today don't want to take that big leap. It's really scary. The numbers are astronomically huge. It's difficult to do. But if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're going to be burning your ships. If you're not, and take another path, then anyway, when you cross into as soon as you cross that line of taking on personal liability, you're burning your ships to some extent. You're not going to go back.
I think where I come from on that and how it gets worded is I think that there is a bit of a, right now, it's very hard to buy camps. That is a mentality out there.
Yes.
And I think that I'll call a spade. Camps don't go on the market.
Nope.
It is a game of people who own a lot of camps reaching out to people who you don't even know exist, to say, can I buy your camp when it's not even for sale, and offering an astronomically high price, leveraging property, all that business stuff that we can get into another time. And so how am I, little Justin, let's even remove my last name on this, supposed to ever think I can buy a camp when they're just getting bought in the dark, right?
No, it's
And
a
so-
super, super good point.
And so that's where I think that we need to kind of get off the high horse of you need to own a camp, and it's you can just be a director at camp. That is so okay, but I still don't think that we are preparing directors. And I
Correct.
don't think we're doing a good job at keeping talent in the industry either, and we're not giving them actual like things.
Correct.
Like I would love to learn how to do things that I know are important at camp, and I would love to find that place because I don't think it's all the time at the camp you're at.
Well, I agree with all of what you're saying on that one. I think that if, let's say you're taking a different path, let's say you have an owner that wants to preserve the legacy of the camp and just has somebody coming up or thinks they have somebody they can hire. What are the kind of skills that I am going to look for in that person? Am I going to look for the person that can do cash flow and spreadsheet analysis really well? Or am I going to look for personality and charisma? Well,
Are you going to look for the person who's an impact storyteller and then hire a fractional CFO?
no, I'm going to.
You're not going to do that.
I'm going to take the impactful storyteller and teach him the basic business skills he needs to run a camp because they're not that freaking hard.
Well,
They're
this is
just hard.
Jonathan is literally, he's telling you the Gary from Pine Grove story.
Yeah,
That is what he's
I
saying.
mean, more or less.
Shout out
It's
Gary
not
from
just
Pine Grove.
Shout out
Grove.
Barry from Pine Grove.
It's
He's going to bike
anybody.
across the country.
Yeah, it's anybody that's worked for me. I mean, I open up the books, I give them full responsibility. I say, here it is. I check in. It's all online now. I check in. I'm like, okay, what was this? What was that? I mean, there's a lot of trust.
What's your PhD in?
Management.
And you were also a business teacher, right?
Yes, I taught graduate
Okay.
and undergraduate business.
You're good at this, right?
Thank
This
you.
is a skill that you have.
Most people
Everyone
don't.
has this.
Yeah, most people don't have this. That's a very good point, Justin.
I think that you have that advantage to be able to flip that person. And I
Yeah.
think that there's so many CMOs, CFOs in the camp space right now as consultants because they know that camp people are inherently bad at this, which I don't think
I don't
is something
they're
that we
bad,
should
Justin.
run
I'm
away
gonna go
from.
with I don't think they're bad. I just don't think I just think they don't know. And
I don't think they know. Yes.
yeah, and when you walk, it's funny. I've actually submitted a session at Tri-State on this year. I haven't been accepted yet, but it's called, if I do get accepted, it might be a good session for you to go to. It's called Camp by the Numbers, where we're going to cover like all the different areas. And there's something else that, and I'm not really the right person to talk about, but I'm probably better than to talk about this, but I'm probably better than most. Like gaining an understanding of the US tax code and how it works, because counselor math is meaningless when you start factoring in the taxes we pay. But everybody loves to do counselor math. They're like, oh, geez, they have 1,000 kids. They're getting $8,000 per kid. Gee, that's $8 million. Well, why am I only making $60,000 a year, right? It's well, it's not quite that simple. That's one of the topics I'm going to cover in that. Again, just should the session be accepted, I just think there's a real lack of business. And I've been saying this, Andy knows, for 25 years. There's a lack of business. The drive for business education in our industry is non-existent. It's just non-existent.
So
Can I
I
say
agree.
one thing from the
Sam, you go first.
nonprofit? The nonprofit organizational camps, we burn our ships too with our own brand. So if you can only take a big leap and mess it up a few times before the whole industry knows that now you're not going to get more opportunities. So in a way, we still have the burning your ships and the
The
branding
professional
thing.
burning your ship.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, which is true in private camping too, to some extent. But I think that I'm actually talking about sort of that when you go through the eye of the needle. But yeah, that's a similar thing in NFPs too. And it exists.
I agree with your finance piece on not knowing this stuff. And oh man, if I lived in utopia, I would love to have the space where we have these conversations and we are making sure that as an industry, we are creating the networks of young people, both in camping already and those interested in camping. I'm talking about the people who are going to a really great school or wherever, who've worked all throughout college and camp, never took an internship, people who love camp, right? to then inform them about these things so that they can make their choice and decide if this is something they want to do and then get competently trained ultimately.
Yeah, it's not rocket science. I mean, I love the consultants and the accountants and everybody who likes to make these complicated charts of account and make it look like this is rocket science. It is not rocket science. And early on, I'll go back to where Andy started with something we skipped. I met Maury Stein very early on in my career too, because he went to Brandeis with my mom and with Nancy Goldberg. And when I sat in his office and he saw that I had an MBA, and he said, well, this business skills is really more valuable. And I go, well, what about all the other stuff I need to know? And he said, Jonathan, anybody can run a campfire. And I think people look at the business skills like, oh, it's this amorphous set of accounting and all this other crap. And it's really not. It's really just basic math. And the math is done for you by a computer and crunching data. And that's all there is. I mean, that's all it is. It's sort of, you're data driven and you understand the financial ebbs and flows of your business. It's not that hard. It's not that hard. I mean, I don't think it's that hard to teach. So that's sort of that was my impetus for the tri-state session.
So Justin, you brought up an interesting point when you came back from your little epic pickleball tournament the other day and at Jeff Lake. And you said one of the things that was just like the common thing that people talked about was everybody's underpaid. Everybody feels like they're grossly underpaid, right? Full-time people.
Yeah. So there was two takes. So a question I asked to a group of people was like, do any of you ever want to own a camp? And all of them said no. I was like, oh, snap. Okay. Interesting. One person was like, I'd run a camp, but I would never own it for liability purposes. But everyone was talking about, yeah. I mean, it was a lot of people who, if we're using like de facto numerical rankings of important positions at camp, they were like 3, 4, 5, 6 people at camp. And they were all just talking about how they don't make a lot of money. And I think, like teachers, we don't do this for the money. However, I do think young people, especially, are really struggling with the money thing right now to get into the industry. I think it would be a really hard sell for me. And I talk to young people all the time to recruit someone to take such a low paying job. I mean, Andrew, you told me recently that there's a #1 job at a camp with no health insurance, no benefits for $60,000 to $75,000 a year. It's not great. That's a #1 job.
Right?
Yeah. That's a hard sell. I mean, I took a risk financially with my job, but I have an entrepreneurial streak, drive, willing to fake it till I make it, do whatever I need to do. But I don't think people are feeling that way.
So here's an important question. If I told you, or if I asked you, let's just say you were making, let's use nice round numbers. You're making $100,000 a year at one of these nice camp jobs, and you have some of your expenses paid, pension, health. And my question to you would be, Justin, how much of a cut in pay would you be willing to take for a big upside? If I said, okay, you gotta drop down to $65K a year, you're just gonna get some really basic benefits, but in 2 or 3 years, you're 25, you're 28, you're 30, you're 32. In 2 or 3 years, you might be at $300,000 or $400,000 a year. What is that? That's the risk, I think, that along the lines of what you're talking about. That's the question. That's the way to pose the question. What are you willing to give up now for possible future profit?
Oh, I played this game. I took a 75% pay cut going from corporate to camp. I know what you mean in terms of that. And yeah, I am down. I am all down for that.
Well, now speak more broadly. I mean, are you finding people have an appetite for that kind of risk or not?
No, people don't have an appetite for this risk right now.
Yeah.
I think that
people don't even want to own a house.
Yeah, like just coming out of COVID and everything that's happened from there, it just, there's been a lot of turbulence in life, and consistency is not a given anymore. And so people are always just looking for the next best option. Yeah, of course. I think people are just looking for the best option.
My dad used to always say you have to work more than you're paid before you're paid more than you work. And nowadays, I don't think anybody thinks that way anymore.
Can I spin that into something
Yes,
a really
please
smart
do.
person told me? Shout out Jack Shot. Jack Shot says that you should do something really well and do it in a cool way, do cool stuff, and it will attract the cool people. And my advice to young people in camp is to go to a camp where you can actually succeed at something because they are in a deficit. Mine was staffing. They needed staff. I got staff. I had to figure out nuanced ways with a small, teeny little budget. And then I got a microphone and I screamed about it at Tri-State and other places, right? And now people ask me for staffing help. And now people know who I am, right? That's my suggestion. There are camps. I toured a bunch of camps in the last month. that all are like, yeah, it's better than it was before COVID, but we're not at our COVID numbers where we had all these kids. We need kids. Oh my God. If you can get kids, camps will hire you right now, right? You pay for yourself quickly. So it's figure out what a camp needs and then crush it there and then use that as your resume, amplify yourself, sell yourself. This is the age of branding.
Two things. One, I would say that the lack of entrepreneurial appetite, for lack of a better word, I can probably connect directly to your level of financial projection competence. Because I think if you sat down with some of the people who you said none of them and literally did a 2 or 3 year financial projection and said, this is what could be at the end of the rainbow, you might change their minds.
Wait, but no one's having that talk with them.
That's why I'm here, big guy.
Like I see that rainbow was given to me at 6 years old with my dad talking about how he's like trying to buy his camp, right? And I'm sitting at the kitchen table, like I heard all of this all my life. So I get it. I'm willing to take the risk. I'm down for it. But the rando who's worked at a camp for 10 years and now just took a first-time job at a camp they didn't grow up with and are clueless in and are getting underpaid and maybe don't like the directors, like it's hard to.
And
it's hard to
the
keep
second thing I wanted to touch on was a study we just did this past summer, whose data was, I thought, really eye-opening. We basically polled all of our families, all 3 camps, just this past summer. It started in some focus groups we did in May, but it speaks exactly to what you were talking to about why it's a little bit more difficult now. So what we found was prior to COVID, 2019, something along the lines of 95 to 100% of our parents were both working full-time out of the house. That number has gone down to 18%. All right. Yeah. Like about 20%. So now you got 2 parents who can arrange their schedules. So somebody's home picking up the kids. Now, particularly, I think this is my feeling in the day camp market, we're not a must anymore. It used to be bus was there at 8, kids came home at 5, aftercare, before care. We were a must. If you had now, you might have some other less expensive options that you can juggle around and shorter sessions or whatever it is. I think demographically, it's just not the same anymore.
Yeah, no, that's a great day camp point. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah,
I find
we found some other good data too.
I find a lot of parents doing 1 week to try it out to see if it's worth the money or worth it for their child, and because they don't have to. So they're trying shorter bits.
Yeah,
I don't
no,
know if
listen,
we're happy anymore.
Liberty Lake's success is due 100% from 2002 until for the next 5-10 years was due to people needing childcare in this area.
100%.
Totally. I recognize that.
100%. I mean, if you look at what I like to call the golden age of day camping, that was those fat years in the 90s and 2000s, where a lot of, by the way, Justin, a lot of the same things applied now. There was a lot of, we didn't have COVID, but we certainly had a lot going down between 9/11 and recessions and all the other fun stuff that we had happen. There was a lot of that. Nothing quite to the extent that COVID was, but there was always something on the horizon that you had to worry about, and there still is. There always is. I mean, I have lots of concerns about where the economy is now, but that's sort of a standard. The not knowing is a constant. So
right. But just following up on something Justin said about quoting Jack and saying that figure out what you do great and all, and you'll be wanted if you let people know. Because for years I've always been like, you just join the Tri-State Program Committee, meet people, go to a network, find out who these people are. Like Jonathan did the research to find out who owned Crest Day Camp and showed up at their corporate office, right?
Well,
do the legwork. But I want
to go because that is a good answer, but I think it's more rooted in the past than.
Yes, that's what I was getting to.
I want to go one more. I'm going to see that and I'm going to raise you. Okay. My daughter was a competitive gymnast for a lot of years. And I will never forget what one coach told her, which I thought was the best athletic advice and the best advice for anything. He said, don't work on what you're good at. Learn what you're not good at and work on that. So if you are that amazing guy that can do fill in the blank and you have that in your pocket, now say, what is my biggest weakness? Because bringing up the worst part of your game raises the entire level of your game, right? And I think that's true in business too, whatever it is. So it's really easy to do the stuff we love, to play the music we like to play, to do whatever it is. But when you really work on what your weaknesses are, then you become a better performer. And I think that's a valuable skill.
Right. And what I was getting to was that what young people have such an unbelievable advantage at right now. They have this great window where a lot of the owners, operators, directors, whatever, CEOs, of program directors of these camps do not have is the technological know-how, right? Is understanding computers, IT, social media, right? How spreadsheets work, like all that kind of stuff is more second nature to them because they're digital natives, plain and simple. And I think that's a huge advantage that they need to play that so much more because AI, right? How many young people are constantly putting their stuff into AI, right? Older people, we just don't have the patience for it. And I think that if they play that card, that is really going to help get them into businesses, into organizations right now.
I still think you have to be a superstar at something and can be able to market yourself, because I don't think anyone's going to take a risk on someone who's, I want to learn how to do this, but I'm not good at anything else. But what I'll say is something that Andy and I talk about a lot is, like, in the last month, I've been asked if I know a bunch of people who could potentially work at different camps. There's a lot of whisper job offers going around right now
Ah,
for
look, you're in
director
the
jobs.
whisper, you're in the whisper community now. Look at
Like,
this.
do you know anyone who's in this area who'd want to maybe leave their camp job and run this camp type of thing, right? And I wasn't talking about being good at something, or maybe wasn't networking with people through being good at something, them coming to me giving them advice, like playing that game. That's how you network now, I think. I don't think it's joining a committee. I don't think it's like waiting around at a bar at Tri-State, because when I go to Tri-State, I barely talk to anyone new that I know because I know too many people already and I'm stressed out about saying hi to all of them. And it's just hard. It's like hard for me to have 20 minutes for someone who's just like, hi, Justin, nice to meet you. Like, I can't do that. That's so crazy.
Definitely changing in a lot of different ways. But yeah, you stand out when you're really good at something, and that piques people's interest. And then they want to ask you questions and go from there.
Yeah. All right, guys, we have to wind it down. It's been a great conversation. Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you sharing and being generous with your story and your time and all that kind of thing. I think there's a lot to be learned from it, and we really appreciate it. We want to thank our friends at Camptivities, at Commercial Recreation Specialists, and at Camp Minder. Justin, we forgot Camp Minder. The folks at Go Camp Pro for allowing us to bring this podcast to you. If you like what you hear, you should subscribe to the Day Camp Pod on your favorite podcast platform. Check out our show notes for all our episodes at daycamppodcast.com, as well as contact info for the show. For Jonathan Gold, for me, for Sam, for Justin, and thanks for listening and making yourself a better Camp Pro. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode of the Day Camp Pod. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Camp Owners Podcast. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review on Apple Music or wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, you can find our show notes at gocamp.pro/ownerspod. The Camp Owners Podcast is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network. Find a podcast for camp pros of every age and stage at gocamp.pro/podcast. Hey Camp Pros. We love that our industry is built on sharing. In order to foster that spirit, if you've gotten even one good idea from a Go Camp Pro podcast, a masterclass, from the Summer Camp Pros group on Facebook, at a conference, or wherever else, we ask that you give credit where credit is due. That way, we can encourage camp pros to keep freely sharing their brilliant ideas and make the camp industry better. Thanks very much.